Welcome back to Evergreen Perspective. I'm your host, Ben Chrisley, and today we're joined with the Mayor of Ridgefield, Matt Cole, one of the fastest growing areas in Clark County. Matt has a big job on his hands. Matt, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
And so, I'd like to jump right in. What was it that made you want to be a mayor? What was that about?
Well, I never wanted to be a mayor per se. When we moved to Ridgefield about 9 years ago, we knew we were going to be here for a while. We knew this was going to be like where we put our kids through school and all of that. And so, I owned a business at the time, and I thought I want to be more involved in my community. I had an office downtown Vancouver, but living in Ridgefield, and so I started applying for. I saw like Parks Board openings come up and Planning Commission, so I applied for those. I think I applied for each of those like 3 times a piece. And
how'd that go? Did you get accepted or
no? I did not. Not at first. Not at first. But I applied enough that I got the attention of the mayor at the time, Don Stoss, and finally he calls me and he says, "Hey, I see you've been applying for a lot of stuff. I don't have any of those things open right now. We've had some other people we want to kind of get in, who have been we've been trying to get in. So, but I'd really like to get you involved some way. The thing I do have right now is this mosquito control board. Would you be interested in that?" And I was like, "I don't know what that is, but I'm in." So that was my foray into public service. I think I did that for a couple of years, led to the Planning Commission and some other advisory boards in Ridgefield. And then ultimately, when Don retired, it left a seat open. So there's an appointment up, and I went for that. And the rest is history.
Yeah. So, I don't think a lot of people know. Let's go back to this mosquito control board.
Yeah.
What's the mosquito control board all about?
Yeah, so it's part of the Clark County Department of Health, and it's a board that just basically advises the staff for policy and budget there. So they have a whole thing. It's actually a pretty smart program. It's the things that you don't see. This is what fascinates me about local government, is that there's so many things that we don't see, and mosquitoes are one of them. We think about mosquitoes, you're like, got one, like that, like there's a you don't notice until they're there, but the control of that is, you'll see these guys go around and they'll spray and they'll kind of do like these like aerial sort of treatments and everything like that. And so our job was basically just to help approve policies, as it relates to other jurisdictions, and then just do the budget stuff. So that's kind of what it was about. But it was really funny because it was during the pandemic, and during the height of the pandemic, they weren't doing any control measures. And we have a green space, and there was mosquitoes everywhere. And then the next year is when I got appointed to it. And my kids were younger at the time. They really thought that I had a hand in making sure the mosquitoes in our neighborhood went away. So I was a hero for a bit.
Yeah, I felt like I got bit a lot more during that time. I'm just saying.
You probably did.
What? So just curious. This is just curious for myself and maybe some folks listening too. What is the budget like for the mosquito board?
It's been a couple of years. They have a few million that they work with every year, and again, because they do a lot of like aerial stuff. So especially around Vancouver Lake, they hire a helicopter. There's a helicopter that does kind of like some stuff there, and then they have treatment all over the county. Ridgefield is actually probably one of the more intense areas in the county for mosquitoes, just because of our proximity to like waterways. There's the refuge right to our west there, and so we do get a lot of mosquitoes, and so you see it a lot more. But it's it's a pretty good sized effort, and they treat all over Clark County, but there's some areas especially they treat more than others.
That's super interesting. I would never really gave it much thought. Is there any controversy around the spraying of chemicals for mosquitoes? Is there?
Yeah, sometimes, and I think that's largely born from people just not understanding it, because there's like when I first got on it, I was like, okay, this would just be like another community board or whatever. But it was chaired at the time by a guy who had a PhD in biology. The executive director of the program, he was a PhD guy, really smart guy, I think in mosquito science or something like that. And so some really smart people, and what they are really conscious of is the chemicals that they use. And again, I'm not smart enough to talk to those, and it's been a couple of years, but the chemicals they use, and they try and make sure that they're doing things that are environmentally safe. And in fact, if they're spraying around the refuge here in Ridgefield, they have to, because the federal government won't allow any sort of like toxic pesticides be sprayed within the refuge area.
Oh, yeah, super interesting. Yeah. So, obviously, Ridgefield, we opened the show talking just a little briefly about the rapid growth in that area. You moved there 9 years ago, and so you've seen a lot of changes in 9 years. And I imagine there's residents that have been there for a long time, and now they're feeling pretty encroached upon. As the mayor, how do you dealing with the dichotomy of those two different folks up there?
Yeah. So I always say, like, I've only been here 9 years, so technically I'm still like new school Ridgefield. But I do like to say that I moved here pre grocery store, right? There was like when we moved here, we moved from East Vancouver where we had products like Costco, all the grocery stores, everything like that was in like a couple of minutes drive. Here I was like, we got to go where to get groceries? What are we doing? And so it was a big win. Like we lived here a couple of years before a grocery store arrived, and then everything else just kind of happened. And we hear that all the time too. There's people who've been here for generations, and has a long reputation as this sort of sleepy farming community. And so you get a lot of opinions there, and there's a lot of tension with growth. Anytime you're dealing with growth, you'll kind of wrestle with some of that friction there between people who want things to stay the way it always was, and then people who are moving here. And once they move here, of course, they're always like, stop the growth. So I saw that on a comment the other day. I saw somebody said like, end it now on Facebook. And I clicked on their profile. I was like, you moved here in 2021. What are you talking about?
I know it's so crazy, right? Like, and I think we all have a little bit of that NIMBYism in us, right? Not in my
Totally.
backyard type of mentality. Like,
Yeah.
it's good until it's not,
It's good until it's not. And what I tell people is look, I know that there's tension with the growth, but and a lot of people, wag their finger at us, and they point the finger at the city and they say, stop the growth, stop doing this. And what we tell people is like the city government isn't necessarily choosing what's coming in here. We didn't choose Costco to come here or In-N-Out. I mean, there's some nuance to that, but what we do tell people is we manage the growth. We know that the growth is going to happen. And so if it's going to happen anyways, we might as well manage it smartly and make sure that we can build out the city and the community the best way we know how. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that.
Right. What do you feel like is the biggest tension point between those longtime residents and those, the newer, maybe less than a decade folks like yourself?
Yeah, I got a good friend, and she's a farmer. And we were having coffee, I guess, last summer, and we were talking about the same issue. And she said, hey, Matt, what you need to realize is there's a lot of people who are like really mourning the loss of what Ridgefield was, as far as the very rural community, the very small community that it was. And I think it's not so much it's not so much the growth itself. It's just more kind of like mourning the loss of it. So what you'll get, those same people will talk about, they'll poo-poo the growth, but they'll also talk about how nice it is to have Costco right there at the junction, and that they don't have to drive very far to get their groceries anymore. And so there is that. So it's not necessarily like what has been added to it. It's more that they look around and they say, hey, this is not the community that my family raised me on. This is not the community that I went to school in. This is a very different community than it once was in the 50s, 60s, 70s and on. And so I think that that's a tension point. And so, in my role, as I talk to a lot of people, I try to be really sensitive to that, because I realize that there always is that. Like we're always going to wrestle with kind of past, future, and present. And we're in this present moment looking at where we're going to go. Even right now, we're finishing up this comprehensive plan, which is going to take us through the next 20 years, and looking at that and saying, hey, I know it's not going to be that way, the way it once was ever again. But the best thing that we can do is figure out what is the vision for the way forward, and how do we make this a place that's actually a place, not just a space that we're occupying, but it feels like home to people, that they feel like there's a connection here, regardless of how many stores or houses or businesses come here.
Right. So when you talk about smart growth, what does smart growth mean to you?
So smart growth means to me, like, I've seen a lot of, and our city manager calls it seeing the matrix, right? So before you kind of get into this, you look around and you're like, oh, like you don't really realize it, but you ever drive by maybe a city, drive through a city, and you're like, oh, this is ugly. This is just strip malls, and it doesn't feel really well planned, and things like that. Smart growth to me is just making sure that we're planning effectively, like we have the right appropriate zones. And so Ridgefield is really unique in that, we start at the junction at the freeway, and it moves westward to downtown, and eventually end up at Lake River in the refuge. And so all of that, you go through these different zones, right? So if you start at the refuge, you have the big commercial regional businesses. You get sort of what I call midtown, where you have a lot of the commercial neighborhood businesses, and then you kind of go down further into the downtown core, and it feels like that Mayberry vibe, right? And so like there's all these areas that we planned intentionally. And so what we said is, hey, downtown, you'll never see McDonald's. You're never going to see an In-N-Out or Starbucks downtown. What you will see is the neighborhood businesses, a small family-owned business, the quaint kind of boutique shop that gives it sort of a nice sort of charm to it. And then, but you expand as you go. So if we create those zones, then people feel like there's pockets for different levels of activities and services. And then we also have like a lot of parks. And so the city, like our city council, one of my favorite things that we've done is we've allocated 25% of all new development to open and green spaces. So we build a park or a trail network or just an open area. And that is a way for us to kind of like hang on to, because it's a beautiful area. I mean, everyone knows it. Everyone always talks about that. We want to preserve that beauty too. And so making sure that we do that. So that to me is like the smart growth. Where are your pockets of development? And then how do you preserve the open and green spaces to make sure this is still a thriving, beautiful area that you want to live?
All right. So how do you manage that growth with, obviously we have a lot of new homes coming into the Ridgefield area. And so when you step out, right, and I think a mutual friend of ours who's been in the government business for a bit likes to say, we're in the forever business.
Uh-huh.
And so when you look at 10, 20 years in Ridgefield, where do you see that growth going?
What we're looking at right now is, the state will give projections to the county, their growth projections. Here's how many people you can expect over the next 10, 20 years. And then there's going to be like, income levels assigned to that and jobs factors assigned to that, and then density allocations. And so we got to hit some density targets. And that's a real hot button issue right now too, is like, how do you apply density in the right way? So what we've been saying is, sorry
to interrupt it.
Yeah.
Did Ridgefield expect this amount of growth? Was it expected to boom the way it has?
I think we expected, going back to the last time we did this update was 10 years ago, so it's 2016. I think the city was definitely anticipating the growth it did, but I don't think what we expected was a global pandemic and for that pandemic to spark even more intense growth. Because between 2020 and I think 2023, we grew by 58%. I mean, holy cow, right? Just in a couple of years. I don't think that we expected to grow that much. But we knew that growth was always on the horizon. This was going to be a place, because if you look around the area regionally, you look as far as west as Washougal, and Washougal kind of gets built out. You go to Gresham, and Gresham's kind of built out, and or as far south as Wilsonville. All those surrounding areas are kind of getting built out. As far as buildable vacant areas in the region, and proximity to things like the airport or like recreation or, like major metropolitan areas, Ridgefield fits the bill. And so that makes it naturally an attractive place. And so we knew that it was going to grow, but I don't think we anticipated it to grow as much as it did, especially during the pandemic.
Right. So, with that growth obviously comes, we talked some about the comprehensive growth plan, but, how do schools fit into that, right? We've had a lot more families move up there.
Mm-hmm.
How's that balance been between trying to get the school system up to par?
Yeah, that's one of those tensions we wrestle with because they're almost on two separate tracks. On the one hand, on the city side, we get the allocations again from the state. We know we got to grow, but we're planning for that growth. We can't just stop it. We can't say stop growing. We have to. Like by law, we have to. And then on the other side of it is you have to support it with your infrastructure. And one of the pieces of infrastructure is our school system. And so, the way it works in Washington State to build for new school buildings, it has to be passed by a bond of the voters. It has to be voter approved bonds. And so, and in Washington, it's got to be a supermajority, so 60% of the vote. And so we've had a real hard time getting bonds passed. And what you see is, I think I forget how many it's been, but it's, like 3 or 4 over the last 5 or 6 years and they've all failed. And they've all been failing by, one of them was like less than 100 votes to get that 60% mark.
Why do you think they're having such difficulty passing? Is there still a lot of old guard that doesn't want it? Are these new families moving there and thinking, well, I don't want to pay more to live here? Or what do you think?
Yeah, and if you look at like the boundaries, there's a jurisdiction for like Ridgefield School District, which is much bigger than just the city limits or even our urban growth boundary. And so if you look at the data after each of these elections, inside the city, the bond measures have been approved overwhelmingly. The voters, I think it's like 70% of Ridgefield voters approved for it. But when you get into the more rural areas and inside the school district still, that's where you start to see it start to slip. And I think a lot of people, you have lived here a long time, what you've seen is the cost of living go up. And what you know is, hey, if I approve this, my property taxes are going to go up. They already have gone up. We approved a capital levy last year, and I think everyone's starting to feel that. They've seen their property taxes go up, and they know that they can't afford that. And they say, hey, I don't have any kids in the school system. This doesn't affect me. That whole argument where they say no to it, and they feel like it's overtaxed and really overbuilt. Some of the plans, admittedly, I think the school district has put forth in the past have been pretty substantial. We did one a couple of years ago that was for repairs at a high school, a new elementary school, and I think would have funded a new middle school as well. And it was something like oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher this, 170 or 190 million dollars or something like that.
We won't hold you to the exact number.
Yeah. But voters were like, "Oh, that's a lot," and so it failed. So when they pared it back last year to say we're just going to focus only on a new elementary school, and granted it was different. It was a levy, not a bond. And using some other funding measures, it did pass. And so I think that it's kind of wrestling with that tension of how big do we need to do it? How much in the future do we need to be looking, to do right now? And how do we appease what the voters are looking for, what they feel like they can sustain? And so it's a constant tension point that we're kind of wrestling with to figure out where's the right balance.
Right. Because, I think some of the draw comes from folks saying, hey, we moved here, we built these homes, those taxes should be able to cover the growth, right?
Yeah. But they don't. They just don't. Like the taxes that get collected through the school system, when you collect your property taxes, if you see a pie chart, the biggest chunk of that will go to schools. And, schools, the cost of maintaining schools is high. The cost of as for a growing education system is high. And so like the existing tax structure is there's not a capital bond in there that's going to approve buildings. It all goes to support what our existing infrastructure is. And then we also have a thing we say growth should fund growth. There's these things called impact fees. It gets really, really complex as far as, there's a formula for it. Like when you build a new business or you build a home here, you're creating an impact to the area. There's a portion of that, but you can't use that, unfortunately, for the whole thing. And so you end up kind of like with pieces of like different pots of money that aren't quite substantial to build a new school. And what you really need is the whole pie to make that happen.
Right. I just had Senator Cortez on recently, and we had a pretty long discussion about impact fees. And I know he's got some pre-filed bills. He's trying to be able to utilize, those impact fees for other projects such as building, be able to get them to go a little further.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely complex, but it can work. It'll work in a way that matches the impacts to growth. So a lot of times you'll see that in traffic or parks. We'll get new roads out of it, new roadways, and that helps fund. The city has used that quite a bit to fund a lot of the growth measures that we've seen here.
Right. So you're using those funds on more the infrastructure piece to offset. Is that how that's?
Yeah, and there's school impact fees too, but again, it's just not enough to cover an entire elementary school even. So,
right.
And you can't.
And I think education is something that we're all, really excited about, and we want to have the best education system in the world, and somehow, we still struggle to fund it. And I think sometimes people forget that, maybe I don't have a kid in school anymore, but those kids in school right now are going to be the kids that are giving me my medical care when I'm old. I want them to be educated. So I personally don't mind throwing a few extra bucks into a school levy.
Me neither. And we voted for my wife has ran the bond and levy campaign. She's done an incredible job at that, has been a huge advocate for getting the funding we need to match the growth. And we do see that as a responsibility. It's a generational responsibility. And I know that a lot of times we say, well, it doesn't affect me, but you do live in a community and you do have a responsibility to your community. I mean, it's not a free ride. And so I know that people don't love taxes. I don't love taxes. But what I do love is quality of education and adequate infrastructure to support all the needs we have for a growing community.
Right. And I think that's where, having as much transparency as we can with the money collected and the budget and where it's going so that everybody can have a clear picture of where it's at. And a lot of people say, it's not transparent, but you can find all that money down to the penny. I mean, without too much difficulty.
Totally, you can. It's all out there, And one of the things I love about this era that I think we're in, this digital age where everything is just so accessible, is you do get that. Like if you ever want to look at our city budget, we have a website that'll not even just like a PDF that you can download. It's interactive. You go through and you can dive through, you can click through every line item to see how it's being spent and how it's allocated. And I love that. I'm a big advocacy for transparency and accountability in government. And it's something I'm really proud of what we do here in Ridgefield as well, because we have been pretty exceptional in how we've managed the growth of the city and the city's finances, and it's kind of cool to see the result of that.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, I agree. I agree. And so with that in mind, we're talking about a little bit of infrastructure. There's a little piece that, gets a lot of publicity, and that's the IBR, the I-5 bridge replacement.
Yeah.
Where do you see Ridgefield's role in that? And where do you feel like some of that controversy is coming from?
I think the controversy first comes from a lot. Again, that same mindset. There's a lot of smaller cities inside Clark County who are not directly connected to access to the bridge, or even the other component to that that's really controversial right now is light rail. Mm-hmm. And so they say, hey, look, we're paying into this system. The public transportation benefit area is what it's called, a PTBA. Every city pays into it, who's opted into it. And we want to see the benefit come to us. This doesn't affect us, and so therefore we don't want to pay for it. They have a problem with the cost. They have a problem with some of the design of it, and so that becomes sort of fodder for them saying we don't want to be a part of this. The fact of the matter is that bridge is, to me. I lived in Mount Vernon a long time ago, and there's a similar situation where there's a Skagit River and the bridge that kind of goes over the Skagit River into Mount Vernon. A truck hit it about 10, 15 years ago, and that section of that bridge fell into the water. And I just keep thinking of that myself as like, how long until something devastating like that happens, or that we saw in Maryland a couple of years ago as well, where, like it's aging infrastructure. It has never intended to last this long, and it needs to be repaired. And so what I tell people is you get different arguments. You say, well, we need a third bridge, or we don't need light rail because it brings crime and things that we don't want, or the bridge is too expensive, or I don't like the design, or maybe it should just be a tunnel. And what I've been telling people is like, look, I hear all of that. And I think there's valid arguments for every one of those things. The fact of the matter is that where we're at right now is we have decided on a bridge. We have decided mostly on a bridge design, and there are components of it. There are federal requirements for it right now. And so I think that before we entertain a third bridge or a tunnel or any other mechanism there, we need to get the one bridge built, and then we can move on. But a lot of the small cities don't see it that way because, again, they don't feel like they're getting the value for their PTBA dollars. And I'll say that from Ridgefield's perspective too. I think we get 10% back of what we pay into it through sales tax. And so, but to our last, the conversation we just had, we also know that we're part of a greater region, and we have a responsibility, because I know that there's quite a few residents in Ridgefield who drive to Portland every day, who are driving to Vancouver, or, going across that bridge for work or shopping or whatever, and they're going to use it. And so if we use tolls, they're going to pay for it one way or another. If they use light rail, they're going to pay for the light rail fare. And so they will pay for it. But I think a lot of times people think, well, it doesn't affect me, so I don't want to pay for it. I'm out. And that's just not how it works.
Yeah, it seems to be the I-5 bridge replacement project has taken some partisan tones. How did public transportation and infrastructure, how do you feel like that became so partisan in nature? What's the driver on that?
That's a really good question. I think there are things inherently aligned around maybe political philosophies that are accurate or inaccurate. So you can say, at a high level. And again, I'm not saying this is accurate, but you say, okay, if you tend to be more conservative, and this Southwest Washington is not conservative, it's not blue or red, it's very, very purple. And it's actually what I think it is actually ultimately a good thing for here, because you get a lot of different ideas and it forces us to have to work together to kind of meet in the middle. But you get a lot of people maybe come from a conservative viewpoint and say, hey, it's too expensive. And it's not going to manage the crime well enough, or it's a bunch of infrastructure and bloat. We saw that with CRC about 10, 15 years ago as well, where there's a lot of debate over the cost. And then on the other side of it, you say, hey, we need these things. We need to look at different modes of transportation. The model of everyone driving their personal vehicle to work every single day, I don't think is sustainable long term. I think we need to start pursuing some alternative transportation measures, and that requires a change of mindset. I think that's really hard for a lot of people to comprehend. I'll be the first in line to say that I don't love the idea of like if I had to take the train to work every day, that I think I'd struggle with the transition of that. I think I'd ultimately adapt, but I think a lot of people changes, when you look at that, change is hard for a lot of people. And so there's a lot of debates on what is next and how do we match the demand, what we see for high growth region. And, then you get sort of like different philosophies that are applied to that loosely. And I think it just turns into like this partisan divide when it really doesn't need to be.
Right. Because when we think about, C-TRAN, right? C-TRAN runs up to Ridgefield. And how much, think about the usage that we have, right? As the cost of living and affordability has been driven way up, right? There's more families that maybe only can afford one car or no car, but these folks have to be able to get to work. And so, other people don't see the advantage to that. But if we want to keep Washingtonians in Southwest Washington working, some people do rely on that public transportation.
Yeah, they do. They definitely run that. They'll need to increasingly do that. And what we've been saying in Ridgefield is, hey, I know we're not getting out what we're putting into our PTBA dollars, but we do have one dedicated line for C-TRAN that runs through Ridgefield. It's Route 48. We do have the Vine as well, so you can call the Vine and get a ride. So there are solutions, but one of the conversations we've been having here, and it's really early yet, but starting to ask questions like, hey, what does the future of public transit look like? Is it buses and light rail, or is it more things like the Vine? Are we going to have more things like that allows people to be flexible? I think what you hear a lot of people, especially in like a spread out region like Southwest Washington is, Clark County is very spread out. It's not like a major metropolitan area, like if you go to DC, like you ride the metro line there, you can get stop to stop and it doesn't impact you as much. But here, to get to downtown Vancouver today, if I were to take the bus, it'd probably take me an hour and a half, 2 hours, when I can just get my car and drive 15, 20 minutes. And so I think that's what a lot of people wrestle with as well. So we have to start thinking about that in a different way. Maybe buses are a component to that, but I think we need to look at other options. And I think the Vine is really a kind of a great middle ground as of right now.
Yeah, I think with that piece there, I was just thinking about Ridgefield and the growth. What type of influence do you feel local government has on bringing jobs to Ridgefield so people don't have to travel, down the I-5 corridor to Vancouver or Portland?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something else we're talking a lot about in this comprehensive plan update. What we've learned about Ridgefield, and again, don't hold me to any numbers. In fact, I won't even quote any numbers, but what we've seen is and I think everyone's seen this, is a significant a growing number of people in Ridgefield and around the area are remote workers. I myself am a remote worker. I have a day job and I have a mayor job, and my day job is remote. And I know a lot of my neighbors and a lot of people here in Ridgefield are the same. And so what we've kind of done is we've engaged in conversations with builders and developers to say, hey, look, when you're building a community center, maybe we should build co-working spaces within that. Maybe we build like a business center like you see in hotels, like conference space or just meeting rooms or things like that, to make this an attractive place that you want to come and either start your virtual business or you want to work remotely, and then also make it attractive to businesses as well. Costco, the introduction of Costco to Ridgefield, that introduced 300 jobs that we didn't have before Costco opened. And the result of that is that you're going to get other businesses that are starting there, like In-N-Out. I think the In-N-Out employs I think 100, 150 people or something like that. All the other businesses are sprouting up there. That's bringing jobs into Ridgefield. But again, Ridgefield is a high growth area. It's also unfortunately becoming a high cost of living area. And so what you need is high paying jobs. And like companies like Costco are great. We love having companies like that because they're good to employees. They're just good companies. And so we need to have more things like that that provides those living wage jobs and make sure that people can afford to live here. I want my kids to be able to buy their first home in Ridgefield if they can. Right now, I don't know if they could. So we need to create conditions that allow for that as well. And that's something we're looking at as we do our planning as well.
Yeah, I think you hit on a very important point there. When we talk about it's nice to have businesses come and develop, but if they're not paying living wage jobs and those folks can't afford to live in the communities in which they are working, what type of programs or thoughts or how are we making housing affordable in Ridgefield?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to density and the usage of space. So what you'll get and what our residents have said, like every decision we make, by the way, as far as how we grow and the planned zones, they're not just like us in a box, just kind of like pontificating and coming up with some sort of like wild idea, like here's how we should do it. We do quite a bit of community outreach and we listen to our residents. And so what we always say is whatever plan we come up with is community driven. This is the community's vision. And what we do is we have a balance of homes. Sure, you get some of the bigger homes, maybe even some homes that are on a larger footprint, larger lot size, and then you get a good mix of higher density space as well. We were doing this thing over the summer because we're going through this comp plan update, and we're working with the county council on that. We were taking county councilors, onesies and twosies to do tours through Ridgefield, and it was interesting to have them kind of roll through town and say, "Wow, I didn't know that you had this many apartment buildings, or I didn't know that you had this many townhomes." And we're like, "Yeah, we do," and that's why we wanted you to see it because we are building our density. But there is also a need to preserve, I guess, some of the single family lifestyles that people are still looking for as well. But the future for us will be, like a lot of other areas, is a lot more density, but we got to do it in a way that matches. And when you do that, it makes homes more affordable because you can provide a larger housing inventory. But and then with that, if you looked at mixed use areas like we're looking at up by the junction and north of town, that provides more opportunities for jobs as well. And it's not just retail type of jobs. It could be, professional working wage jobs, that would be available as well.
Right. So, you mentioned working with Clark County and the Clark County Council. Are there any friction points there between what Ridgefield would like to do and then what kind of the county council is saying differently?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll preface that by saying that, yeah, there's friction points, but it's not, I think when we think about politics and we say friction, we think, what with the national scene looks like and how divisive it is. It's not like that. And I'll also say that, we work with I work with all the other mayors in the community. I work with, we work with the county council, you work with the other elected officials, our state reps, and across all kinds of different party lines or political philosophies or whatever. I have a tremendous amount of respect for everyone I work with. I don't think I've met anybody yet where I'm like, that person's a real turd. They don't belong in that office. They just don't, because I think most people are really trying their best to come up with solutions, and we might disagree, like have a different idea philosophically about it. And so when it comes to, our growth and working with the county council, there is one side that, it's like there's this term, no net loss of ag land, which 100%, I get it. And then the other side is like, yeah, we're for, urban area expansions and growth and, having those conversations or finding kind of the balance between there. And so, Ridgefield has made a couple of requests. We've got a couple of pockets where we're looking to expand our urban growth area. A couple of those are on areas that are designated as agricultural lands. And so that tends to get a little spicy because once, the narrative you hear is that once the ag land is gone, it's gone. It's never coming back. And I believe that as well. And I want, I tell them, I said, hey, we're not that far apart. I know that I'm advocating for my city for you to expand our growth areas and de-designate ag land, but I'm not here to say, I just want to, this is not the Lorax where I just want to bulldoze everything and put up factories everywhere. I want to preserve as much farmland as well, but I want to make sure that we characterize land in a way that makes the most sense. And so if it is open land that's ag area, but it hasn't been farmed in years and it will never be farmed and it's characterized by growth on all sides, like one of these parcels is, then I feel like that makes the most sense to say we have some density requirements we're trying to meet. We want to grow our community smartly, and so we need to, like, we're asking for that to be de-designated, and we can put multifamily housing there and mixed use spaces so that it can be a thriving place where people can come and live and hopefully afford to live. If we don't, what it's going to do is going to jam a lot more homes. Like what we said is like, the area north of town where we want is that provides up to 2,000 more homes and 1,000 more jobs. And if we don't, we're not going to be able to find a way to provide those jobs. And we're going to have to jam 2,000 homes in existing areas where we really don't have the density that I think that a lot of people think we do.
And so with that said, when we talk about builders and developers, where are you guys meeting there? How does that?
I'm a middle guy. I always want to meet in the middle because I really believe that, especially when you're looking at policy decisions, when you're making political decisions or kind of navigating a political landscape, that when you play the zero-sum game, you say it's got to be all one way or all one other way, then nobody wins ultimately. Because what you do is you create more consternation, you create more friction in your community. And I think the best policy decisions are where everybody gives up a little bit of something and comes with a resolution here. And so one of the things we've done with some of our ag de-designation requests is we've introduced a thing called transfer of development rights. Basically what it says is, like, if you're a developer and you're seeing an area that you want to develop that's ag, then you can go to another area that's also ag in the county. You can say, hey, would you be willing to sell your development rights in perpetuity, and we'll pay you a fee for that. Basically, we'll buy your property from you, but not like you get to keep your property, but you have to keep that agricultural forever. And then it allows us to de-designate this other area. That's something we're looking at as well, because that feels like it's a balance. When we look at characterization of what's around there are a lot of areas in Clark County that are designated ag that need to remain ag because they are actively farmed, or they have farming potential, or there is no characterization of growth or development around it. And so that's one area that I think that several members of county council especially seem amenable to. And so we're exploring that with them as well. But that's a meet in the middle sort of solution, right? Trying to figure out, okay, we can give up something, we can give you something that's palatable so that you can say, hey, we did preserve ag land and this is how we're doing it. And that way, I think that everyone, like, is it the most ideal? Is it the no net loss of ag land? Not necessarily, but it's something that I think that would meet the need and get everybody a win.
All right. So when we talk about permitting and zoning, how does that work in Ridgefield when they're going through their zoning or the permitting process for building? Let's say they got to get Ridgefield, Clark County, and how do they navigate?
Yeah, it depends where it's located. If it's inside the city, usually the permitting really is handled exclusively through the city. So we'll do that. And this is not what you asked, but I always love to brag on our city staff because I think we have one of the best city staffs in all of Clark County. We place a lot of pride in our customer service and making sure we're efficient. I never want to see a local government that bogs people down in bureaucracy and ties things up and delays, and they're just not getting to it. So we try to be really efficient with that. And so we've done that. So the permitting process is pretty straightforward. We've tried to expedite it. We've had a few measures, ordinances we passed, I think last year, where you can have an expedited, if it's a pretty straightforward plan, we'll get your permit passed like right away. So you can do kind of a speed lane because it doesn't require like a lot of review. But we always try to make sure we're working with everybody and we're doing our due diligence to make sure that, like, the things that they're asking for is aligned with our community vision, aligned with city code.
Yeah, I think when you look at the growth up there and the amount of new developments that just continue to churn, it seems like that's working for you guys.
It really is. It really is, like, and Ridgefield, it is an exceptionally well-built community. We went through this phase where we knew, and it was, I think, 2 years ago, where we knew, we saw that we've always said, hey, we're the fastest growing city in the state of Washington, rah, rah, rah. That's been a big thing that we've always talked about, and we still largely are. I don't think we are the fastest because our housing, we saw the housing numbers, we knew it was forecasted to kind of level off a little bit. We're still building homes, but not at the clip that we were doing it a few years back. And we knew there was going to be a transition between the residential growth and then more the commercial development. And I think that's where smartly we looked at, okay, we need to transition our focus to building out infrastructure that'll support a more vibrant economy to get people to and from places easier. We need to support zoning that supports commercial businesses, and that's where you get the junction area, which has all the new businesses coming in. And that's good from a tax-based standpoint because it just means that you're funding your city through sales tax dollars. I love sales tax revenue because it means that you choose how much you're taxed based on how much you shop. And also you have people from outside your city funding your growth. They come here to go to Costco to shop from Kelso or wherever. We're like, thank you. We'll take that percentage that goes to tax revenue and we'll use that to reinvest in our city to make sure that we continue to provide the great services and infrastructure that people need here.
Certainly, a Costco is a good addition to that, without a doubt, and probably that In-N-Out burger as well. Is it still jamming up there, or what?
Yeah, it is. In fact, I actually went to In-N-Out for dinner last night, and what I'll say is, my son, he's got basketball practice, and so we said, hey, it goes right through dinner time. We're like, hey, after dinner, you choose. We'll just go grab dinner. He's like, I want In-N-Out. So we went. I looked at it again. So from the time we ordered to the time we had our food was 12 minutes. And then we were in and out of the restaurant probably in less than 40 minutes. And so it not too bad, right? For a restaurant that's and that according to In-N-Out, I think it's one of their busiest stores across the country for them. And so they've done a really good job there. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, that was quite the big deal. I followed the Facebook page, from ground break until opening. It baffled me why there's like a cult following with In-N-Out.
There really was. I mean, it was wild watching it unfold and wild watching how intense that whole thing was. On the one hand, I remember turning to people and be like, this is not policy. This is just a business opening. And on the one hand, you're like, it's just another business. But on the other hand, you're like, it's not. It's In-N-Out. And there's quite a bit that comes with that. But again, what I love about Ridgefield is that we're attracting really quality businesses like In-N-Out and Costco who are really good to their employees, that pay well for the job that they're doing, and just have a great brand and a great ethos about them.
Did you do any type of proclamation? Did you get first in line at the In-N-Out, or did you get any?
I didn't. So In-N-Out was like, we don't do ribbon cuttings. We don't they don't do that, And so, but we did a little thing. They had a thing the night before. We got to go get some of the first burgers, and we got to do a tour of the place, which is really cool. And on the morning of, we went out there with Ridgefield Main Street, which is our downtown initiative, because again, we're sensitive to the idea that a lot of big businesses that come at the interest of our city may detract from the heart of our city, which is downtown. And so we partnered with our Main Street organization, and we, as people were in line, we were handing out little goodie bags saying, hey, here's some Main Street moolah, what you can use, actually get as cash at downtown businesses, or, we give them a little swag bags and stuff. And some people were coming from, we were just asking people, where are you from? From Seattle. From some people came from British Columbia, people coming from all over and getting to talk to them. But that was sort of our contribution to say, welcome to Ridgefield. We're glad you're here. We know you're here for a burger. But while you're here, before you head back up north, why don't you stay a while and go downtown and see what else we have to offer? And that was kind of a fun way to do that as well. And we had a QR code, and it was good to see the matched effort where people actually did that.
That's a lot of fun. That kind of brings kind of a good segue into this next piece, just kind of talking about general civic health, right? There's this growing kind of mistrust of government. I mean, there's always been a little bit of that, I think, under the surface, but it seems to be bubbling up pretty great here. And I've heard you say that, local government is where democracy can be its best. So with that in mind, how do you maintain the folks of Ridgefield to really feel good about their local government there?
Yeah, it's not lost on me that, ultimately, I hate, I'm a politician, I guess. You say, hey, you're a politician, so we don't trust politicians. We think we say all politicians are shady, or, and so, I've always really believed that government can be good, that government can provide good for the people that it serves, and it should. And the way you do that is through accountability and through transparency. And so when I was first pursuing my city council seat, I was asked about that, it's hey, why this? I was because I think local government is is the heart, is the epicenter of where you can change that. Sure, you're going to get the people who think you're trying to always play gotcha, find the way to say that, you're lying or inconsistent or whatever. But, for me, I'm all about, I say, show me, I'll show you. We'll show you the books. We'll show you how we're going to do it. We're going to just demonstrate what healthy governance looks like. And if we can do that, then maybe you can start slowly winning hearts and minds. And really where I say, like, if you look at the national landscape and how toxic it is right now, we don't see as much of that in Ridgefield. And I always say that local government, it can best mitigate that because you're working with your neighbors, right? It's not some just like faceless name that you're kind of doing a Twitter battle with on, online. Like you're talking to your neighbors here, and you might disagree, but at the end of the day, you got to see them at the grocery store, or at the PTA meeting, or at the softball game. And I think that's important to recognize, is like we have to still coexist. We have to live together. And so if I can show you that we can even disagree in a healthy way, and that I can respect where you're coming from, you can respect where I'm coming from, and we're trying to work towards the same solution. If we can demonstrate that and model that, then hopefully that can trickle up to other areas of government where you don't have as much of that. I really want to be a part of the solution and not part of the problem. So, and I call it, my wife and I call it, we want to be builders. We're trying to figure out ways to improve civic health, and we do that at the local level.
Yeah, I think so. And so in your council meetings, have you seen some of that national rhetoric come in with angry at these meetings, and how do you handle those situations?
So amongst our council, no, not so much. And I know that 7 members of council, we all have our own probably political viewpoints on things. And even when it comes to local issues, we do. And we'll have some hearty debate at times. But again, it's never divisive. And what I love about what we do on our council is that we ultimately, I think everyone's there and knows that we're trying to do what's best for the city. So we usually arrive at the same solution together. And it's in the best interest of the city. But like local issues that you're talking about, ordinances and things like that, like they can get a little spicy at times, but like not really too much, because you're not dealing with things like ICE or abortion or government overreach or like national security issues, which tend to be like really, really hot button issues that people get passionate about. But again, in our community, we'll get people come in occasionally and have viewpoints and opinions. But where you see it a lot is like online. And so, every community, I think, has their city page or their community pages on, Facebook or whatever, and you get the keyboard warriors out there. One of the things I love to do is when I see those people in person, I love, like they'll sit there and they'll attack you, and they'll say all kinds of stuff, and you see them be like, hey, it's good to actually meet you in person, and let's have a conversation. And by the end of that conversation, usually like we walk away acknowledging like, hey, there's 2 human beings here who live in the same community, and actually neither one of us is really that bad. We're not out to get each other. And that's been a winning strategy, is just to name it, to call it out, say like, I've seen this stuff, let's have a conversation about it. And when we can have a conversation about it, that's where you can make real progress without kind of doing like the divisive trading barbs, that nobody wins that way.
Right. And so with that in mind, talk a little bit about kind of the structure of the government in Ridgefield, and what do you kind of wish residents knew about how things came about and how decisions were made?
Yeah. So at the highest level, like how we're structured as a government, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it, and something that I didn't fully know when I first got into local government either, but we're what's called a council manager form of government, which means that we have an elected city council, and the who does all of the policy and budget. But the day-to-day administration of the local government is carried out by a city manager and staff. And so the city council hires the city manager, and so that's the executive in the city. I don't have any administrative authority in the city, thank goodness, because it's a big job. But we have a really highly qualified city manager anyways, and so who's really exceptionally good at his job. And we have a great working relationship with our city manager. And so that's how it works. And then as far as mayor goes, and so there's 7 members of the council. The council appoints who the mayor is. So I'm appointed by my peers. I actually just got appointed to a new 2-year term last week. So I'm locked in. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here again. And so but a lot of people don't know that. They think, oh, like you should run for mayor. And, I had to run for re-election for my council seat this year. And I put up a few signs because I wanted people to know that I was running for re-election, but I couldn't say I was running for mayor. I said city council position 4, and people were like, wait, are you not going to be mayor anymore? They didn't know the difference. And so you spend a lot of time, and that was just an opportunity to have conversations around it. Like, yeah, actually I am the mayor, but I'm appointed by the rest of our council, not the voters. Vancouver does a little bit differently. They have the same council manager form of government, but the mayor runs at large. And then other cities like Washougal and Battleground are just like, Ridgefield, where the council appoints the mayor. So it's still a mayor job. You're still doing quite a bit of mayoral duties. But that's how our government works. And then, just everything gets carried out at the staff level as well. And, that's where you see a lot of the real stuff happen. And we just help guide that and guide the community conversation.
Right. So what do you think the largest misconception is about, the juice or the power that you got to just make things happen?
Yeah, that we're choosing the businesses that are coming here. We're choosing the growth. Like we're saying, hey, let's like we're playing Sim City over here. Like I'm like, let's add this and let's add this, and we have credits here, and we're kind of doing that. There is a little bit of doing that through the zoning and process and how we plan for the city. But when McDonald's said, hey, we're coming to Ridgefield, we weren't like, we don't like McDonald's, you can't come here. Like we can't say that. And I am a Diet Coke fan, so I didn't have a problem with McDonald's coming because it made it. McDonald's has the best Diet Coke, so I didn't mind. But like you get that, that we are choosing those businesses, we don't, or that that we're the types of houses that are built or the type we zone for those again, but we're not choosing to we're not putting nails into boards. That's somebody else's job. That's a private industry, and we're just helping to provide guidance and I guess a facilitation of that. And people don't understand that.
Yeah, I think, every politician's corrupt, right? You're taking handouts from McDonald's is the one that gave you the money to approve them to be there, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, right. No, yeah. And that's the other thing too. You get a lot of that, you get a lot of people saying like, oh, city council must be on the take. Like they're getting, they're getting paid to do this or something like that. I'm like, I turn to my other fellow council members. It's like, you guys, where do I update my address? Cause I haven't seen the check yet. I haven't gotten paid for it. And nor would I accept the check anyways, because that's not what you do it for. Like really, like I got into this because I wanted to be part of a community. I wanted to help shape a community. And I get to do that now, and it's not because I'm going to profit from it. I haven't profited. If anything, it costs me, to do that. But the thrill to me is just seeing a lasting contribution of what we get to do, and it's not about profiting from it or anything like that. It's really about doing what's best for the city.
Right, and that's that's that human side of being an elected, right? As electives, nothing. To hear that, it's hard to hear people say, you're corrupt or you're taking the money. How do you feel like as elected officials, how do we get people to understand that, that's not the way, that's not what I went into public service for, and that's not what you went. And most 99.9% of all the folks I know that are doing it, aren't doing it for whatever the corruption or the checks or where does that come from and why do people think that way?
That's where I will point the finger at the other Washington. I think Washington D.C. has quite a bit of corruption that comes out of there, and I think if you look at members of Congress who get elected and they're just average people, but they come out of their millionaires, or you see the more or less insider trading, or because they know things, or there's ways to profit from your role in public service, at that bigger macro level. Yeah, that absolutely happens. And I think that we got to find ways to limit that because it's unethical and it compromises you. At the local level, there are so many laws and regulations around even how we can meet and how we can talk to each other and all of that stuff that that we've really curbed that. And also there's just not as much to be on the take for. I could get insider trading information, but it's not going to be related to my job as mayor. It's going to be probably something else, that's not how it works here. And I'm not getting kickbacks. And nor do I want that because again, I don't think that any of us here at the local level, you don't really do this to kind of think this is how I can plot my evil take over the world. I think the work we do at the local level is hugely important. It's very big, important work and significant work. But again, it's not the kind of work that I think that you can really profit from or, you should profit from. So,
right. I agree 1,000%. So on that personal note, what do you find most stressful or pressure driven about, being council member and then mayor now for another term? How's that deal with your daily life?
Yeah, it definitely makes it busier. And I joked at the beginning of this podcast, saying hey, I never wanted to be mayor, and I really didn't. When I got on council, I looked at what our mayor did and how involved she was on all these different things, and I thought that's just too much for me. Like I have a career. I want to still lean into my career. I don't want to do the mayor thing. And then as I kind of did the job, I was like, man, this is great. I really can make an impact. I think I can make a contribution here. And the mayor thing kind of more or less sort of, I don't want to say it fell in my lap, but I just kind of I gravitated towards it. And by the time I got there, it was earlier than I wanted. I think I actually wanted to pursue becoming mayor this year, not last year. So it was like a year early. Because it's a lot of work. It can be a full-time job, and often is. And so and then you have that on top of everything else you're doing, right? And then what I also say is the job itself is you're straddling between the policy work that you do. So it's the budget, the policy measures, looking at growth and all the planning and all of that stuff. And then there's the community side of things, which is, the fun things like ribbon cuttings and community events, but it's really about engaging with our residents, being visible, being accessible to them. And we had a huge effort around that last year. And so those are kind of two areas. And then you add the mayor job tends to be a lot more regional. So you end up doing a lot more regional policy stuff, a lot more regional community stuff. That's where it starts to get a little political. But it's also, you kind of balance it all out. And then I have to kind of balance that out with a family. I got 3 kids who are all still in school. At home, I have a full-time career. We have a very busy family, and so it's just a lot of coordination of scheduling and all the things we have going on. But I think that's just the stage of our life we're at right now. And I think that we're all it's a lot, but we're thriving in it because we feel like we're making an impact.
No, I love that so much. How do you handle, some of the criticism that comes with holding public office, especially in an area like we've talked about before that has a pretty wide, diverse group of constituents?
Yeah, I think your biggest critics are going to be people who don't know you or don't understand your motives. So you'll see a lot of that, some of the sharpest things I've heard said about me, or, you look online and you're like, okay, whatever, I was like, I don't know who that person is. I don't know where that's based off of, but also you also accept that when you get into this, that's just kind of ends up being a lot of what you're up against. And I don't mind it. I don't take it personally. I say the policy work and the policy decisions that we make are not necessarily personal to me. I'm not doing it because I have this personal conviction on it. My conviction comes from doing good things, finding ways to make government effective for the people that it should serve. But being married to a policy and then, having some sort of personal vendetta there, that's not how I operate. And so I know there's criticism to come out of that, but I know that the criticisms are about the policy and maybe the position on that policy, not necessarily about who I am as a person, at least I hope. But even if they were, you gotta have some grit. And I don't let it affect me too much. And there hasn't been too much of that. And so, sure, if you got things you want to lob my way, then go ahead. But I'm not going to do the same.
I got you. So that kind of brings us to a segment I like to do here on the show. It's your welcome to politics moment. So it's that moment, it could be funny or sad or tragedy or whatever, but that moment that you realize holy crap, this is politics. I'm in it now.
Yeah. I think I'll go way, way back on this one. Thinking about it years and years and years ago, I had a policy career before I went into business. And so what that looked like is I ran some campaigns. I worked at the state legislature in the policy shop for a while. I did some think tank stuff, and I did some different policy things. But one of the campaigns I read, it was a state house campaign up in Whatcom County back in 2002 or 2004, way long time ago. And the candidate that I was working with, he was an older gentleman. He was his mid-70s. And in the middle of the campaign, he had a heart attack and had to have open heart surgery. And he was and this is late September, early October, right at the stretch of the campaign. I'm like, oh my gosh, and we're going against an incumbent at the state house. And so we were scheduled to do a debate. And I was like, how are we going to do this? We can't cancel the debate. You can't not be at the debate. But he was literally in the hospital. And so everyone decided well, here's campaign manager. You stand up there then and you do the debate. I don't know what we were thinking. And so I did. And so I got up there and I as a long time state legislator, she'd been there for a lot of years, and we stood on this stage in a school auditorium, and I got there and she was so she was so miffed that I was there on the stage. She's like, "Why am I even sharing the stage with you?" And honestly, if I was her, I don't know if I would. I probably would have said like, "I'm not doing this. This is not who I'm running against. You're not my opponent." And I was representing her opponent's positions. And so, but I did that, and I got a taste for what like live debate was and debating a lot. A state legislator, sitting state legislator, and I don't know. I didn't have any business up there, but that was a welcome to politics moment where I was like, okay, like now I'm officially, I can say I work in politics. I have no business on the stage, but I'm doing this. And, and I left that thinking like, also that was kind of a lot of fun and I'd like to do this in the future.
That's all. What do you think you learned from that experience? What'd you take away from that? Besides, you wanted to go into be more political.
Honestly, it was really more about like having courage because there's some nerves with that. I've always been a guy like I'm always very calculated. I look at like I want to weigh all the risk and everything I'm doing, and sometimes you don't have the opportunity to weigh the pros and cons and think, is this the safest thing for me to do right now? And so you let your nerves kind of do that. And I was so nervous. I remember I was so nervous doing that. And then when I came away from it, I was like, you know what? I got this. I can do this. I can do this. I could probably do this someday. This wasn't as scary as I thought. And so if anything, it was just kind of a personal growth moment for me, to realize like, hey, if you're ever on the fence about doing something that you feel is like so magnanimous that you have no business even pursuing it, and you just do it. Once you do it, you're like, all right. Oftentimes you're like, yeah, I can do this.
Oh man, I couldn't imagine. That would be nerve-wracking. As much public speaking as I do now, I get a little nervous every time.
Totally.
Like it doesn't get like easier.
It doesn't. No. When I became mayor, I gave sort of an acceptance message. I said, hey, I want to address everybody because all my friends and family were in the audience and a lot of people in the community were there. I thought I need to address this. And I had this whole kind of speech kind of crafted out there. Just, it's just going to take a few minutes and talk. And I was so freaking nervous because I was like, these are all these people who are like really a part of my life. And I want to make everyone so proud. And I just wanted to live up to the expectation. And, but like now, I still get occasionally nervous, but like you do it so much that like it just comes from just doing it, right? Like it's getting on the bicycle and riding, whether you fall off or not. And Lord knows I've fallen off plenty of times, but it's if you don't take the shot, then you're never gonna make it.
I mean, that's true. Wayne Gretzky said it best.
Yeah.
Right?
So did Michael Scott.
And maybe some other people too, right? I don't think. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap this up. Is there anything you'd like the folks of Ridgefield to know or Southwest Washington to know about you or what you're doing up there? And if they want to know more about what's happening in Ridgefield, where would they go to find that information?
No, just a shout out to my community in Ridgefield. Like we really do have, I said, we're a community that shows up, it's a very active in community and we can't do what we do without their participation. So in many ways, my job is a lot easier just because we have an active community who shows up, who's invested in what we're doing, who wants to be engaged in a conversation. So I'm really proud of that. I'm proud to have a council that I have a great working relationship with. And so what I always tell people too is, especially in our own community, I love to meet with the residents. So if you're a Ridgefield resident, you ever want to get together for coffee, if you have questions about things, you want to find, you want to know like how the sausage is made or anything else, let's meet, let's talk. And so, from Ridgefield, hit me up. And, we have a lot of work to do going into this year, both in Ridgefield and regionally. And so looking forward to continuing to work on those things and seeing some benefit that we can provide to people who live in our region and continue making it great.
I love it, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been Evergreen Perspective, and we'll see you next time.